This is the Dr. A Show with your host, Dr. Will Aguila.
This is Dr. A, and welcome to the show. Thanks for listening. On this show, I bring you topics that matter to the way you live your life. I want you to know that in the struggles and obstacles that you have to overcome in your daily life, you are not alone. We're here to help, offering you guests with expert tips on the topics that matter to you. On my show, you will find something for everyone. Today we will cover two important topics that affect millions of Americans each year. Anger is a powerful emotion that we have all experienced at one point or another, but for some, anger is a way of life, and this causes difficulties at work, with the family, and others. Our guest says that we can outsmart this anger, and he is here to show us how. We also have a touching story of a woman who beat her struggle with bulimia and found real happiness in her life. Now she teaches others to do the same. All this today on the show. First, do you or someone you know seem to be angry all the time? Does this anger put a strain on your relationships, your job, or your health? Do you even know that you have an anger problem? Well, my next guest says that not only can you recognize that you have an anger problem, but you can also outsmart it. Dr. Joseph Shrand is an instructor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, an assistant child psychiatrist on medical staff at Massachusetts General Hospital, and the medical director of CASTLE, which is Clean and Sober Teens Living Empowered, a brand new intervention unit for their high-risk teens. He has authored several books including Manage Your Stress, Overcoming Stress in the Modern World, and his newest book, which is the topic of today's conversation, Outsmarting Anger, 7 Strategies for Diffusing Our Most Dangerous Emotion. You can find Dr. Shrand on his website, drshrand, shrand.com. Dr. Shrand, pleasure having you on the show.
I am delighted, Dr. A. Thank you for having me.
Now, Dr. Shrand, anger is an emotion that we all experience at one point or another. Why is it that you had to write a whole book on it?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, seeing as though so many people have been wondering about that, because it's such a basic part of our lives, isn't it, Dr. A? We experience anger from very, very early age, and yet trying to understand it, trying to understand the significance of it, the evolutionary significance of it, I think can help people so they can become more aware not only of their anger and how to modulate that, but more importantly, how to modulate somebody else's anger.
Now, for many people, it's hard to believe that anger is just an emotion, because it is, and not a state of being. A lot of people live in a state of anger all the time, and maybe not even recognize it. Why is it so difficult to understand that, to see what you're doing?
Well, it's remarkable, because the understanding part is a different part of our brain. The anger is actually generated in a much more ancient part of our brain, a part of our brain that is literally hundreds of millions of years old. It's called the limbic system, which is a complex group of structures, but they are really responsible for emotions, for impulses, for seeking pleasure, for memories. It's actually where addictions happen to live. But the thinking part of our brain is relatively new from an evolutionary point of view. It's only a few millions of years old. And if your listening audience, just for a moment, puts the palm of their hand on their forehead, right behind that forehead is what we call the prefrontal cortex. That's where thinking is happening. And that part of the brain is responsible for being able to solve a problem, execute a plan, anticipate the consequence of that plan, and it actually also happens to be the part of the brain responsible for something called theory of mind, which is a relatively clunky term that expresses our ability, our human ability, to appreciate what somebody else is thinking or feeling. So your question, why is it that sometimes people live in this angry state, is because sometimes they're not even realizing that they're that angry. They can't recognize the anger because it's become such a part of their limbic lives.
Does that prefrontal cortex, that front part of the brain, develop with age and mature, and then as we grow older, we're more apt to recognize that we're doing that?
It certainly can and does. What we know in adolescence in particular, and I don't know how many folks out there have adolescents. I certainly know that all of us have been adolescents, and I, for one, have remained an adolescent in some of my actions. However, that limbic part of the brain is actually relatively more mature in an adolescent than the prefrontal cortex. So you can see how an adolescent is all about taking risks, seeking pleasure, being social. These are sometimes impulsive actions. And then every now and then an adolescent, like we all have, will slap ourselves on the forehead, activating that prefrontal cortex, slap ourselves and say, what was I thinking? Well, you weren't. You were impulsive. And now...
Well, that explains my daughter, So.
Well, there we are. And, and I have 4 kids, and believe me, it's explained every one of them. And I'm sure my mother, would say it explains me, too. So...
Now, there's a very curious case about a gentleman named Phineas Gage in 1848, actually, 1848. And tell us about this. It may be a little bit, we're diverging a little bit, but it's an interesting story, and I think it helped explain a lot of why the prefrontal cortex was so important and what its function was. But give us that story real quick.
So Phineas Gage was a remarkable man who was a very nice, gentle, docile man. He was a family guy. He was foreman for a group that was building the transcontinental railroad going from the East Coast to the West Coast in the 1800s. And his job, among others, was to tamp down the gunpowder so that they could blow up the rocks, clear the pathway, and put their railroad track down. So there's Phineas Gage, a nice guy, tamping down this gunpowder with this giant tamping iron, this iron rod, like 6 foot, maybe 4 foot, 5 foot long iron rod. And somehow a spark ignites, and this rod explodes up right through his head, underneath one eye, up through his skull and out. And he didn't die. And it was remarkable that not only did he not die, but his personality underwent a dramatic change. Now look, if a big piece of iron shoots through your head, you're probably going to have some residual effect. But this was completely different. This had actually, in retrospect, severed the connection between his frontal lobe and his limbic system. So he had no more inhibition on that deep limbic impulse, and he became a very angry man, an irritable man, completely opposite. His whole personality changed. And actually, if folks come up to the Boston area and go to the Harvard Medical School Museum, which is an open museum, they have there an impression of Phineas Gage's skull and the tamping iron that he then used, because he became really a sideshow in the circus. And for the rest of his life, he went around sort of moving this tamping iron up and down through his head, showing people what had happened to him. He was a sideshow, but he was forever changed in terms of his psychology and who he was. Remarkable story. It was actually the beginning of scientists beginning to recognize that different parts of the brain have different functions and different responsibilities. Before that, actually, we thought the brain was just this big blob. And actually, there was a science called phrenology, where people thought that they could estimate other people's intelligence and their abilities by feeling the bumps on their skull. This we do not do anymore. So it's a great story, Phineas Gage.
Now, quickly, we're running out of time in the segment, but we'll pick it up here and do it a little bit more in the second segment. You say there are 3 core reasons why we become angry. Could you tell us what those are? Because those are pretty important.
At our heart of hearts, a human being wants to feel valued by another human being. And when we don't feel valuable, certain things happen. So the real core reasons are we as animals have evolved what all animals have evolved. We have a need for food, shelter, and the ability to reproduce. And for humans, in the Outsmarting Anger book, I sort of expand that to resources, residence, and relationships. These are the 3 components of our lives that we want, need, value, and use to really keep ourselves as part of a protective group. So when those are threatened, our resource, our residence, or our relationships, we can become very angry. And I think it's important at this point to have the definition of anger, that anger is an emotion designed to change the behavior of somebody else. We get angry when we want somebody to do something different, start doing something or stop doing something. And we can become envious that somebody has more of these 3 R's, the resource, residence, relationships. Envious, that means that they now are at an advantage over us and we want to bring them down. Or suspicious that they're going to take what we have because they're envious of us.
Well, hold that thought. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back from the break. What do you do if you cut someone off while driving and they turn to road rage against you? The answer when the Dr. A Show continues. Stay with us.
And now, back to the Dr. A Show with your host, Dr. Will Aguila.
Welcome back to the Dr. A Show. We're speaking to Dr. Joseph Shrand, author of Outsmarting Anger, 7 Strategies for Diffusing Our Most Dangerous Emotion. Now, we've been talking about the powerful emotion that anger is, and also about 3 core reasons why we would become angry. And Dr. Shrand, tell us a little bit about which one of those core reasons is involved with someone hurting our pride, because that seems to be a very common reason for becoming angry and developing outbursts.
It gets back to our sense of having to be valued. And I just want to put this in an evolutionary perspective again. You know, a couple of millions of years ago, we were never the biggest animal, we weren't the fastest, we weren't the strongest. We were really at risk always of being lunch for another animal. We were prey. And then we began to form these small social groups. And our survival potential increased so dramatically that human beings are pretty much now everywhere on the planet. But to be part of that group, you have to have value. And so this is really the question when it comes to pride. When your pride is hurt, what somebody is really saying is, I do not see you as valuable. This activates that theory of mind part, how somebody see me, and then it activates your anxiety and your anger, because the anxiety is that you're going to be kicked out of the group, and the anger kicks in because you want that person to change. So that's how these things connect. When I feel my pride is hurt, it is somebody else's view of me questioning my ability to either maintain my resource, my relationship, or my residence. Am I good enough? If I'm not good enough, am I about to be kicked out of the group and be lunch?
Well, how do you counteract that? What do you do?
Well, the first thing to remember is somebody else's point of view is their point of view, and you have to actually respect that. You don't have to like it. You don't have to condone it. You're going to hold somebody accountable for it. But by respecting it, certain things happen. Respect breaks down into the words again, spect, look. Let me look again at why somebody has hurt my pride. This gets into the real core of outsmarting anger. And it's based on this simple observation, Dr. Ray, and I'll ask you, when is the last time you got angry at someone you really believed was treating you with respect?
You don't.
You don't. And that's a brain phenomenon that I believe has the same reliability as gravity. Apples don't fall up, and the brain does not activate anger when it perceives it's being respected. Because remember, anger is an emotion designed to change the behavior of somebody else. But being respected feels great. So why would I want to change that? This is the key.
That makes sense.
Because this is the key to the whole thing. When we actually treat other people with respect, let them know that we view them as valuable, they are less likely to get angry with us. And now we actually have 2 brains that are not limbic and emotional, but are in the prefrontal cortex and thinking. It leads to the mantra, keep it frontal, don't go limbic. Keep it in that frontal lobe. Keep thinking things through.
I can see a T-shirt like that now. I can see a T-shirt like that.
That's right. Keep it frontal in the front, don't go limbic. That's exactly right. Yeah. And this is the key. This is the key to anger management, because it's not always my anger that gets in the way of my success. Very often it's somebody else's anger that gets in the way of my success. So the anger management, the tool in outsmarting anger, is I can give you 7 strategies so that not only do you manage your anger, but diffuse the anger of somebody else.
And again, it all boils down to an acronym you call RESPECT.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So it's the 7 steps in the book. The first is recognize rage. Rage is anger. And if you think about it, how many different words are there for anger? There's rage, anger, irritated. There are some words that I can't really use on the radio for anger.
Right.
But you know what they are, listening audience, and you probably have used them maybe even today. So recognizing it is important. Then envision envy. Am I angry because I think somebody has more than me and I'm at a disadvantage? Or sense suspicion. Am I angry because I think somebody sees me with envy and I'm suspicious they're going to take something from me? So those are the first 3 steps. Recognize rage, envision envy, sense suspicion. Why am I angry? But then you have to realize that if you're doing this, everyone's doing this. We've all basically evolved the same brain. The 4th step begins to shift from your brain to somebody else's. Project peace. The brain has evolved these remarkable things called mirror neurons, where we can actually mirror somebody else's behavior. You go to a movie, you see somebody crying, you feel sad. You see somebody laughing, you feel happy. You're mirroring their behaviors. Projecting peace allows you to send a message to somebody else's even angry brain. Don't mirror anger, mirror my peacefulness. Then engage empathy. That's theory of mind. I'm interested in what you're thinking or feeling. I'm interested in the fact that you're angry. That means that I see you with value because I'm interested in you. Then you communicate clearly. The most remarkable tool that human beings have invented is language. Think how many words we just had for anger. So you communicate clearly, and then...
And lack of communication can be oftentimes a catalyst for anger.
It absolutely can, because lack of communication is basically sending a message, I'm not interested in you. You have no value to me. You're out of the group, you're lunch. And then we trade thanks. Gratitude is so important. Dr. A, 90% of the time in our culture, somebody says thank you. What does the person say in return?
You're welcome.
Exactly. Not insignificant. You're welcome means I do not see you as a threat to me. I'm not envious. You have more. Suspicious. You're going to take something from me. You projected peace to me. You've engaged empathy. You've communicated with me. You've traded thanks. You are now welcome to my resource, my residence, my relationships. You're welcome into my world. Think what that means. That means that now you have access to so many more things to help you survive. Gratitude is such an important part. And, of course, there's a whole bunch of neurochemistry that goes in with this as well. Oxytocin, these chemicals of trust, because respect leads to value. And value leads to trust. And trust is about oxytocin.
Well, let's put these ideas into action here. Let's take a few scenarios. So, when driving, people cut you off all the time, or you do really dumb things that can cause an accident. Yep. Road rage seems to be more common and oftentimes can lead to violence and death. How should we handle an instance of road rage from the standpoint of the person who becomes angry or enraged?
Yes, absolutely. And remember that aggression is the enactment of anger. So anger itself there's nothing wrong with, but when it tips into aggression, we can really hurt people. So what's actually happened in road rage? There you are driving along in your resource. You've got your lane of traffic. And somebody takes your resource by cutting in front of you. They've immediately created a relationship with the both of you. But it's a relationship that's potentially antagonistic because they've taken something of yours. And you may be trying to get to your residence. You're in a residence, your car, and their residence is now impinging upon yours. So, of course, your limbic system activates, and it gets angry. But then you can step back, and you can reflect. First, am I really envious that this person has cut in front of me? Am I suspicious that they're trying to get in my way? But what if that person has their pregnant wife in their car, and they're trying to get to the hospital because that's what they need to do? You can begin to reflect and use your prefrontal cortex to wonder. The problem that we have with our society today, in part, is we are an anonymous society. We don't have the same cues that we grew up with over millions of years. Facial recognition cues. If I see an angry person, it activates something in me. I recognize their eyebrows are forming a V, their whites of their eyes are showing, they may be turning red, which is a signal of danger. That cues my brain, whoa, I may want to back off. We lose that in cars. We lose that on the Internet. We lose that with text messaging. We lose that with email. We've lost some inhibition. We've lost some of our prefrontal cortical cues to inhibit our anger.
All right. So what's one takeaway message from this whole conversation that we can leave our listeners with as we close the segment?
When somebody approaches you with anger, wonder, what do they want to see different? Anger is an emotion designed to change the behavior of somebody else. A person with anger approaches you. Think, what do they want to see different? And be peaceful. Try to engage with them. Now look, if they're carrying a big stick or a piece of iron like Phineas Gage, you may want to rethink that and just get out of there.
Yeah, right.
The vast majority of times, we can use our mirror neurons to activate the peaceful mirror neurons of somebody else, engage empathy, and communicate with them so that we can all share in those resources, resonance, and relationships. Keep it frontal yourself. Don't go limbic. You'll be fine.
Very good. The book, again, is called Outsmarting Anger. It's 7 strategies for diffusing our most dangerous emotion. And Dr. Shrand's website is drshrand, SHRAND.com. Dr. Shrand, thank you so much for being on the show.
Dr. A, it's my pleasure. Keep it frontal. Don't go limbic.
Will do. Next up, listen to the touching story of a woman who battled bulimia and alcohol to find lasting happiness in her life when the Dr. A Show returns after these messages.